What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Daily Dish. I'm your host, Christian Royston, joined by my co-host, Logan Shanks, and I'll have the women's reporters introduce themselves too.
How's it going, guys? Pavel Markovic back with the women's basketball beat here with my partner.
Hey, everybody. It's Brett Schwellmeyer.
We got a pretty action-packed episode here, quite a bit to talk about. Obviously, the men coming off a pretty massive win over Kansas at home, and the women, got back into their winning ways recently too. And then obviously kind of a tough road trip ahead for the men too. So we can start with kind of the end of the women's basketball's slide there. They were on like a 3-game losing streak going, ending at West Virginia, which, obviously West Virginia is ranked, but that's also kind of a tough place to play as well.
So, yeah, obviously Iowa State played West Virginia last Saturday, lost by 6 to the Mountaineers, which is another potential revenge game for them, which they did pull it out just like Kansas was. And, Brett, what were your thoughts on that game?
I thought it was really competitive the whole way. You had flashes of both teams, showing promise. There were times that they struggled. And one of the main moments to me that really stuck out early in the game was to finish the first quarter, the Cyclones were up by 1, but West Virginia hits that late desperation 3 to go up by 2, and I think that might have changed the momentum a little bit throughout the rest of the game in favor of the Mountaineers.
Yeah, usually you usually see Iowa State have some slow starts to games, but even that was kind of just like a momentum killer, even though it was some lucky, crazy shot at the end of the quarter. But yeah, I mean, obviously it was already starting off bad from the rip just because of having that 2-game losing streak on the road, having that mess up with TCU, and it just didn't look good from the start.
Yeah, it was just a lot of momentum. The energy was lacking, not being able to play at home. And I think it really caught up to them again, especially leading into later in the game when it just really felt like it was all West Virginia to finish the game the final few minutes.
Yeah, and obviously the biggest takeaway from this was the 24 turnovers, season high. Like, it's going to be a recurring theme for this women's team. We always talk about every pod, the turnovers have been an issue, always probably will be an issue. But, it's just going to happen. It's part of the game. And West Virginia themselves, they had 17 steals that game when they were already top 3 in the Big 12 with just steals in general and turnovers. So it was not really a surprise, but it could have been better.
Yeah, when you take all that into account, it's a revenge game. It's Iowa State's 3rd road game in a row. West Virginia, leads the Big 12 in getting steals, and Iowa State struggles with the turnovers. And all that combined really just fed into the demise of the Cyclones in that one. But really the big thing to take away from the Cyclones matchup in this one was Audie Crooks once again with 25 points, career best at the time, and also grabbed 16 rebounds in this one, which did set another career best. And yeah, that was good to see out of her again.
It's not really a surprise to see Audie Crooks yet again making such a huge impact on this women's basketball team. I mean, she's just been consistent every time. She's just had an offensive explosion to keep feeding her in the paint, which has been the key to their success recently. And I mean, even though they didn't win this game, it still kept them within it, because without her 25 points, obviously we've been blown out.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, she was just dominant down there. She gets up the most shots of anyone on the Cyclones, going 8 for 15 from the floor. And another big part of it too was her free throw shooting, going 9 for 11. I think that really helped get Iowa State back into the game too. Her ability to draw fouls and get to the line really helped out in this one.
I agree. Yeah, obviously her performance also won her Big 12 Freshman of the Week with that West Virginia performance, and of course the one against Kansas. And yeah, I mean, there's nothing more to say about Audie. She's just dominant. She'll consistently put up points for Iowa State, and you always going to see her shine on every night.
Yeah, she's such an asset on the floor, game in and game out for the Cyclones.
Yeah, and also we want to talk about, this is the first game that Jalen Bristow started since the non-conference schedule.
I think it was just her first start in general. Actually.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously it's still interesting to see. Bill's kind of switching on the lineups for the Kansas game too. Had Emily Ryan starting also, which is huge. But obviously Jalen had a good game against West Virginia as well.
Yeah, and it started from the jump because she scored Iowa State's first basket of the game. So she took full advantage of her time on the floor and getting to be a part of that starting lineup. And it really lasted throughout the rest of the game. She shot 50% from the field, followed Audie Crooks in scoring with 12, reeled in 5 rebounds, had an assist. It was a really solid game from Jalen Bristow.
Yeah, and Bristow's only had 2 scores over double-digit points, Bristow and Crooks, obviously. But, also it's good to see that other players, performed well off the bench, 5 or 9 points for her on 2 of 2 shooting. She shot 4 free throws, made all 4, which is nice to see.
Yeah, and then Dew was the one who did get swapped out for Jalen Bristow in the starting lineup. But their ability to both have a good game, and especially Nye to bounce back the way she did off the bench, it was definitely a needed performance from her.
Yeah, and then obviously the men kind of had better luck. They're at home. Obviously, Hilton is a nice place to play. Obviously, going to West Virginia is never fun. But the men kind of, I think, surprised everybody in their performance against Kansas.
Yeah, I mean, I had them losing the game. I just thought that with what Hunter Dickinson brings and, their guard McCullough, my bad. And they just bring such a diverse offense that Iowa State hasn't really handled well. And I don't really think they had played a center like Dickinson before he came to Ames. But, they didn't even really shut him down. He still had his way. But Iowa State, they found their way from three-point land, which they have not been doing well all year long. But for some reason, Kansas was letting them shoot that. And Bill Self said it was, the scouting report and whatnot. But, they were letting them shoot, and they were coming.
Yeah, their game plan going in was Iowa State can't hit threes, let them shoot. But, Iowa State has kind of had proven shooters on their team. Curtis Jones can get hot at any night. Keyshawn can shoot. We've seen Taman shoot at this point, and obviously Milan is somebody got to throw in there that can shoot threes. But, even Hunter Dickinson said the main thing they wanted to do was just let Trey King shoot, and they did that early. Trey King hit all of his shots early, and I think that just kind of bled into the team, and just everybody wanted to put them up.
Yeah, and for Trey King to have 2 threes in both halves, they were letting him shoot, and they were coming from everywhere. The corners, the wings, they were letting him shoot, and they were falling. And what Dickinson said in the presser was, usually when a team makes 4 threes a game, and then they come out and they make 14, it's going to be pretty hard to kind of change the game plan mid-game. And, Bill Self, they did a lot of adjustments, getting used to, Iowa State and their kind of offense that they had adapted to, shooting threes. But each team went on, respective runs through each half. But ultimately, Iowa State pulls it out. The fans storm the court, and it was a great atmosphere for sure. But, just a really surprising performance from Iowa State in general.
Yeah, I think I was looking at the stat line at halftime, and I was like, the three-point shooting is pretty much what we've seen at the end of games. And that 14 made threes, that's usually how many they attempt per game.
Right.
So, I don't blame Bill Self for being like, we'll just, obviously we don't have to worry about the threes, we'll defend the paint, because they did do a good job defending the paint. Obviously, Iowa State was outscored in the paint, but, I don't think anybody expected the threes.
No. And they came in late, too, especially with, it's a close game with, I think 2 minutes left, minute and a half left, and Keyshawn Gilbert hits that massive three, kind of like a dagger. Yeah. And, Iowa State was only up 2, and you kind of felt if they don't score here, then, Kansas obviously has a shot to go take the momentum. And this is a spot where you mentioned it to me during the game where Iowa State does not play well in the final 2 minutes. And for them to pull this out, not only just at home, but to prove that they can win games late, that was just really impressive, because that's something that we haven't really seen from them in conference play.
That's the second straight game now that they have proven that they can close games, because, obviously we've seen in the past, their early non-conference tournament, they didn't close games well. Obviously early in Big 12 play, they didn't close games well. But seeing them be able to actually fend off comebacks and be able to end the game against Kansas, that's promising signs going forward that they can actually, win games.
Yeah. And, with Keyshawn hitting that big three, he wasn't the only guy that's kind of been stepping up these last couple games. And we recapped Kansas State already in the last pod, but to recap Kansas as well, him and Curtis Jones have both kind of found their stroke, not only just shooting, but also just kind of found their role in this offense. Taman Lipsey's back. He's not really playing how he was before he got hurt, but that was kind of expected. And, Kurt and Keyshawn both have stepped up as, former point guards on their other teams. And, they've settled into a really nice role that I think has made Iowa State look like I mean, they're at the best that they've been all year so far. And if they can just keep getting better, that'll help them. And you kind of just hope that this isn't like their peak, because, something I was looking through with our visual editor, Jacob, was, so this is the highest that Iowa State's been ranked all season so far. They're at 12 now in the AP poll. The last 2 years when they have been at their highest, they then start to lose games. I think they lose their next game right after they get like in their highest that they were all season. So to kind of wrap that up, you really just hope that you're not playing your best basketball in the beginning of February, late January.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what the coaches preach, is you want to play your best basketball, obviously, in March. But, obviously the jumping in the rankings is something that I think, maybe there's high expectations on the team and they just want to keep performing. And, there's a lot of stuff mentally that goes on with that. I do think that, obviously, we've seen Keyshawn and Curtis get up to speed in the Big 12. And, I mean, you can't blame them for starting slow. You can't blame, like, Milan for starting slow because, the Big 12 is a tough conference to play in, and it's nothing like non-conference play. So, I mean, obviously, they're succeeding in non-conference games. But once you get up against teams like, obviously, Oklahoma and BYU, teams that they struggled against, those are teams that are really going to test how good they are. And going forward, now they've kind of seen that, and they're starting to get their stride.
Yeah, just makes you wonder, like, how much better this team really can be. And I would be surprised. I just would be really surprised if they get any better than how they are right now. I mean, I know, they're not going to make 14 threes every night, but they've looked really good these past couple games, found different ways to win against, Kansas State, TCU, and Kansas. So, they're going to be on the road for their next 2 games. And, I mean, I think if they can split these, I wouldn't be surprised. But if they can win both of them, I mean, you got to start thinking about Iowa State as not only one of the best teams in the Big 12, but maybe the country.
Yeah, I mean, I think if they win the next 2, we could see them easily jump into the top 10. And I've seen, obviously, there's a lot of top 10 matchups going on this week in basketball. There's a good shot if teams start falling and Iowa State is still hot after the road trip, they could even crack top 5. Although, don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
No.
Don't want to jinx them.
And they have the resume, but, it's just all about what they do and what other teams. But regardless, even in cracking in the top 5, that doesn't really matter because they still just they have some unproven, business to take care of in Big 12 play, which you're going to see in these next 2 games.
Exactly. And obviously, before we get into the next 2 games, the women actually played a game earlier this week, although the men had their rest before they have to go on their long road trip. So
huge win for Iowa State.
Yep, big momentum game at Hilton. We'll swing it back over to the women's side.
Yes, the losing streak was finally broken on Wednesday, where Iowa State pulled out the win. Oklahoma State 78-67, I believe. Yes. What were your thoughts on that, Brett?
Oh, it was great to be back in Hilton for the first time in what felt like forever. I mean, it was 18 days. There was a solid crowd. Nearly 10,000 people showed up to this one, and I thought that Hilton was going to show up for this one, and they really did when Iowa State needed it most.
Yeah, obviously, being at Hilton is great. But obviously, they had that hot start also that really helped them get out in front. Oklahoma State, I believe it was a 9-0 run.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, the 9-0 run that forced Oklahoma State to call it early timeout really just energized the place to show we're really back at Hilton, back at home. It feels awesome. The team looked really great in this also. And it was highlighted by also, once again, like we talked about, Audie Crooks set a new career high with 29 points, along with having 8 rebounds on 21 shots.
Yeah, and she won another Big 12 Freshman of the Week award last week. She's on pace to get another one, maybe even, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but maybe another Player of the Week award. It was just a great performance there, and, yeah, it was really good. It was really good.
Yeah, but obviously what we're just seeing from Crooks is just phenomenal play. And obviously it could potentially, like you said, maybe get a Player of the Week or Freshman of the Week again, depending what she does in their next matchup. But also talking from other players, like we had 2 players also with near triple doubles, Addie Brown and Emily Ryan, who both had key impacts in this game.
Yeah, Addie Brown was, she had an illness over the long road trip, so she didn't perform as well. This one, her being able to have a good game was great to see. And part of that 9-0 run, she had 7 of those points. So from the jump, she was really a difference maker in this game. And she finished off with what was it, 14 points. She had 8 rebounds, 9 assists. I mean, she was right there to get a triple-double, and she's been so close so many times this season.
She has, and obviously it was great to see from Brown bounce back like she did, being with the sickness and all. She still performed not terribly. She still did pretty well. It's just not like what we usually see from Addie Brown. And also talking about her defensive, she got 2 blocks and 2 steals, which is amazing to see. You always see her on both sides of the floor give her best effort every time, and she's just been one of the best players besides Audie Crooks on this roster.
All around, Audie Crooks, Addie Brown might be probably the best, I'd say, all-around player on this Iowa State roster.
I agree. And also switching to the other player who had near triple-double is Emily Ryan, who finished with 9 points, 9 rebounds, and 14 assists. That was amazing to see what she did with those 14 assists.
Yeah, the floor general was back at it again out there against Oklahoma State. And the thing about the points for Emily Ryan was that she didn't score in the first half entirely. Her first points came with a minute to go in the third quarter, when Iowa State was down by 1. And Iowa State really didn't trail a whole lot in this game. And that 3 that Emily Ryan hit sparked a 10-0 run to finish out that third quarter. And all that momentum carried through the fourth, and Iowa State just took control and took the game.
Yeah, I agree. Emily Ryan's key 3 was huge. And obviously, she put up some shots in the first half, but obviously you saw she was the facilitator in the first half, which helped her get to that. And I believe her season total before that was 6, so it was a tremendous jump to almost pretty much double it. And also I wanted to talk about a key bench presence was Ariana Jackson. We're used to seeing her start, but then Emily Ryan got the bump up now that she's finally fully healthy, fully back, fully into the groove of the game. And she still gave us 12 points on 4 of 8 shooting. Only shots are made from threes.
And Bill brought it up that although the threes as a whole, didn't fall, they shot 35, which was a season high for threes. They only made 11 of them, but they made the ones that mattered, is what Bill said, because they were going on scoring runs, and they would score, they would maybe get a turnover or a stop, and then they go down the floor again and get a 3. And Ariana Jackson was a big part of those types of 3-pointers that the Cyclones made.
And you talk about having 35 3-pointers attempted. Obviously, they only made 11, but in general, Iowa State attempted 70 shots, but still made 32 at the 45.7%, which is immaculate to see how many shots they put up and still make a good percentage of them.
And a lot of that was how the offense was going the entire night. Emily Ryan said at postgame that it was centered around Audie Crooks for the most part, because Oklahoma State center was out for the game. Bill said that they were running a smaller lineup, so when they got the ball inside to Audie Crooks, she was able to, tower over the smaller lineup that Oklahoma State had. That's why she was able to score inside. So then when Oklahoma State had to put multiple people on her, that's when they were open outside for those threes, and they were able to kick it back out and can a few of those.
Yeah, obviously Bill really took advantage of that advantage with the center being out, because obviously that center would have helped at least limit Audie. Audie would have still did Audie things, but obviously it would have totally changed the game if that center played from Oklahoma State. But obviously she didn't, and you saw the result of the game. But also I wanted to talk about how they had 10 turnovers in that game. We mentioned against West Virginia they had 24. Now they just had 10. I believe it was 8 or 9 in the first half, and then after that it was 1 or 2, which was amazing.
Yeah, I think that too this was the least amount, or either the tied for the least amount of turnovers they had. So that difference of having your most and then your least, they're trending in the right direction, and maybe things can stay that way for a little bit longer.
Yes, we hope to not have to bring that up every pod, that the turnovers have been an issue. Obviously they learned from the road experience, so they had these high turnover numbers, especially against West Virginia, and we're hoping, even though they are on the road for the next matchup, that they don't have this problem. And continuing forward, it could help out immensely.
Speaking of teams that were on a 3-game slide and then broke it, I think at home too.
Yeah, I want to say
Baylor is coming up for the Iowa State men's team.
And they're just kind of what I would describe, one of my favorite words to use on this podcast. You might be able to guess, an interesting team to be looking at. So yeah, they're on a 3-game losing streak. Before, they had a close win really against UCF. They're allowing their opponents to shoot 47% from the field, which is 3rd worst, but they're also one of the best. I want to say they're one of the best scoring offense as well. Yeah, they're the 3rd highest scoring offense in the Big 12 against, one in league play. So just a team that, they can score a lot. And I feel like they're going to find their ways against Iowa State, but also, they're going to allow Iowa State to get over that 70-point hump, which they've gotten, I believe, almost every time on the road in Big 12 play. And when Iowa State's able to, kind of score a lot and not have to rely too much on their defense, it usually ends up working out for them. I think that kind of worked out like in the Kansas State game.
Mm-hmm. Baylor's a team that kind of like came into this season where we had high expectations.
Mm-hmm.
They were high ranked for a while, and I think it's taken a while for them to drop in the rankings because we just are expecting them to continue to do well, but they really haven't looked that great. I mean, honestly, these wins have been kind of wishy-washy, I'll say. I mean, that UCF game, UCF was leading for pretty much for most of it. I mean, we weren't even sure that it was going to be a Baylor win until like the last 2 minutes of the game. And obviously they're dropping games that are close. I mean, they had that triple overtime game against TCU.
At home, I want to say.
Yeah, at home. I mean, and yes, two of those three games in their slide were on the road. But they've also lost games at home, and they've played opponents close at home that they really shouldn't have struggled with as a top 25 team.
And they're a top 25 team, and they're losing to these Big 12 teams that are kind of in the mid-tier. They're unranked teams, and in kind of like the mid-tier, as I would put them, in the Big 12. I mean, three straight losses against Kansas State, Texas, and TCU, and does a win over UCF at UCF, by the way.
Oh, yeah,
does that really change our minds that much? I mean, I know it's a road win in the Big 12, which we have praised countlessly throughout this season, but I mean, against UCF, with Baylor being, the team that they were coming in, is that really enough for our kind of minds to change on really I think they're a contender for sure, but I think they're kind of they're almost creeping into that kind of mid-tier in the Big 12.
Yeah, and I mean, even their wins don't look that impressive in the Big 12.
Oklahoma State on the road.
Cincinnati by what, 3?
Yeah, and then at home against BYU.
So, I mean, the BYU win sticks out as a really good win. Obviously, almost 10-point win. But Iowa State's going to be the higher ranked team going in, which, I mean, probably the first time they've been the higher ranked team in a ranked matchup, I guess. And obviously they're going to Baylor, and we've seen no team is safe on the road. We've seen what happened to Kansas. We saw what happened to Houston when they went on the road against Iowa State. So don't want to get like too cocky. That's obviously Iowa State being the higher ranked team on a hot streak, that they're going to go in and take care of business, because I mean, Baylor is a team that, although, the wins are rocky, it's kind of like, are they going to win these games? That's what you're thinking the entire time. They're still winning games.
And going on the road in the Big 12, I think it's one of the conferences that really, they make you play not like yourself, like not like your team can. And I love that you bring up that Houston game, because we see, Iowa State beat Houston in Ames. But now we've seen what Houston is. They're scoring. I mean, they're going up like 30 on Kansas State. They're turning into that scoring machine. What Iowa State did really well, and, for Houston being on the road, they held Houston to, 55 points or whatever it was. But now Houston's out here scoring like 70, 80 points a game. So, just to bring that all together, I think what Iowa State has done these last couple of games, winning in different ways, is going to actually help them out in this next game against Baylor and Texas on the road, because, like I said, playing Big 12 teams on the road is going to force you to play not like yourself. So if you could find other ways to win other than, Iowa State living and breathing by forcing turnovers, scoring off those turnovers, scoring inside, letting guys shoot threes from out, letting other teams shoot threes. So I think it's just going to be another game where Iowa State goes on the road and we don't really see the same team that they play like at home.
And before the TCU game that that was their first road Big 12 win. Before that game, if they had not played that, I probably would have no faith in them playing on the road, just because we've seen a lot more struggles on the road than we've seen like anywhere else. I mean, that it really has been for like pretty much the TJ Otzelberger era, is road games are tough to win.
Yeah, and for them to now I was talking to Keyshawn about it at the press conference on Thursday, and for him to, or for them to now have Taman Lipsey on the road, they did it in their win against TCU, so that's just even better. And like we were saying earlier, Kurt and Keyshawn are already playing better, so maybe Iowa State again just keeps getting better now that they have Taman, but he's not exactly going to be 100%, but it's just going to be kind of like you said, like any road game in the Big 12 is going to be interesting and fun to watch.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of where you kind of have to prove that you're a good team, is stealing these games on the road, because really every team wants to pencil in their home games as a win. And to do well in the Big 12, you have to be able to switch that flip pretty much. You have to be able to go into enemy territory and pull out like, it's not going to be a pretty win, obviously. You got to go in there, you got to pretty much grind it out, which, I mean, they showed they could do against TCU. So now, obviously, we have more faith that they can. And, I mean, going more like into Baylor as a team, I mean, I feel like Iowa State's done pretty well against these higher-powered scoring like offenses. We saw what they did against Kansas. They struggled a little bit against BYU, but I mean, against teams that aren't really the best on defense, but kind of base, they hang their hat on offense, Iowa State like humbles them pretty much.
Yeah.
So yes, after Oklahoma State, Iowa State will be traveling to a new Big 12 school, Orlando, Florida, where the UCF Knights belong. And this will be the first ever matchup between the two schools ever. And what are you thinking this matchup will be, Brett?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be interesting about this one. Like you said, it's the first matchup between these schools. It's uncharted territory for the Cyclones. But I think that, like the Oklahoma State game, we could definitely see a good mix of inside and outside play, because you look at the difference in three-point shooting between these two teams. Iowa State has both made and attempted twice as many threes as UCF has this season. And you look at the play from the centers for UCF, they're nowhere near the level that Audie Crooks is playing at right now.
Yeah, you see even size-wise, they're pretty much like Audie Crooks size, maybe a little shorter, bigger, whatever. And they're, obviously, like you said, they're not even like touching double-digit points. They're like below 10 points a game, below like even like 10 points or 10 rebounds a game. Like they're not getting that real center presence like you'd expect from like what Audie Crooks is doing. And I really think like even if we're going to Orlando, it's an uncharted territory, like you said, first time they're playing. And even in Orlando, like UCF's 7-4, but their home record, but their only conference win was at home, to be fair, and overtime against one of the worst schools in Houston. So it doesn't even look like they're impressive. Like even you see the rest of them, they've gone 1-8 in conference. Like they've just been blown out almost every game. They lost by 40 plus against West Virginia, but that was, to be fair, in West Virginia.
Right, yeah. I mean, Iowa State lost in West Virginia too, but not by near as many as 40 points. But and like you said too, with their one win being against Houston, UCF and Houston were in the American Conference last year. So UCF still has to beat what would be considered like a true Big 12 school. So I don't think it's going to be Iowa State, but I mean, stranger things have happened.
Yeah, it has. I mean, yes, they have gotten the Big 12 experience with losing to all these Big 12 schools. And yeah, even the American League, like they had Houston, BYU, Cincy, or not BYU, but still, either way, we also talk about Caitlin Peterson on UCF, the one lone bright star on that team. I mean, she's the only one averaging over double-digit points a game now. She actually leads the Big 12 in scoring with 21.1 points per game. And I'm assuming we're gonna have a similar experience that we saw with another Caitlin we played in Caitlin Clark, different spelling, but yes, I'd expect the same maybe defensive structure around Caitlin potentially for Iowa State on Saturday.
Yeah, we could see, like in the Iowa game, it was Ariana Jackson who was guarding her the most, but with that, Ariana Jackson hasn't started the last two games, so it'll be interesting to see what they come out with. It'll likely be Emily Ryan, I would think, would be on her to start, and then switch that out with AJ later in the game. So containing her is going to be the biggest key to Iowa State pulling off this win.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you see from Peterson, she's like the only true person that's on UCF that's making like a huge impact. Like everyone else, like I said before, like doesn't making that much of an impact. You see, but Peterson's making UCF in games. That's the thing. Like, even though they got blown out by West Virginia, like, still, like, they're the reason. She's the main reason they're scoring like more points is because of her. Like, without her, they did. I'd be surprised if they scored like at least or like 40 points a game.
And like you bring up with, they have had trouble scoring outside of her. UCF is 13th in the Big 12 in scoring margin. It's not good. It's just
definitely not good. No.
Iowa State, in pretty much every stat category that I've looked at, is ahead of UCF. So, I mean, they're leading them in every stat category. They're better than them record-wise. They've got a better presence in a center with Audie Crooks. Everything on paper says that Iowa State's going to win this game.
Yeah, I agree. Like, you usually think like the Cyclones will have the upper hand in this matchup, even with Caitlin Pearson's like performance. Like, you'd expect a way to just shut down her, maybe a couple double teams. And I mean, if Iowa State doesn't win this game, I'll be a little concerned because UCF is one of the worst teams in the Big 12. But I expect it to still be a close game regardless because it is in Orlando. It's always tough to win on the road, like the men's team said. So either way, I think Iowa State should be able to pull this one out. I think it'll be closer than people expect.
Yeah, it's not also that it's like a road game that they should win. It's a road game that they can win because they've lost, the 3 road games in a row. They were all against pretty solid teams, I would say, teams that were looking for revenge mostly. And now you've got this school that this is your only chance against them. They're not that great of a team. You have to go and prove that you can win on the road again by beating UCF this week.
And I think this matchup has more incentive for the team. I mean, obviously this will be their true bye coming up after this because the first bye against TCU wasn't planned. They were supposed to play that game. So this bye is actually scheduled to happen. This was scheduled before the season. So, I mean, maybe they stay in Florida a little longer, get to enjoy the sunny weather down there. And, I mean, if I were the team, I know for sure I would be, like, pushing to play hard just so you can, after this, get a real true break, rest and relax, if you want to stay in Florida. But, I mean, I think it'll be great. I mean, it should be a fun one to watch. Sure.
I mean, if you want sunny weather, we're kind of getting there here.
Yeah,
I mean, it's been like 60 degrees here in Ames the past couple of days. Not really your typical January weather, but regardless, yeah, it's going to be, if they can come out of this week, beating Oklahoma State, getting the road win against UCF, and then you've got a long break before playing at home again, like 2 Saturdays from now. Yeah, that'll be a great thing if they can, go on the road and get that win.
Yeah, I know, especially like their next 2 the next 2 games they have after UCF are both at home, but they're both against Oklahoma and Kansas State. So that's going to be some good basketball to watch, but also like they have a lot of time to actually prepare because, when they had that unscheduled bye, like they didn't come out as necessarily prepared as we thought they were against Kansas after they lost to Texas Tech. So I'd assume like the team will take this time to really like take advantage of the time to prepare for what's coming next. It ain't getting easier from here, I'll tell you that.
No, this might be the last game that Iowa State, you look at it and say, they're going to win this game.
Obviously, Iowa State women, they're going to be on their road trip down to Orlando. But the men are going to be stuck in Texas, playing Texas. So, interesting.
Yeah, and kind of like this, game matchup against Baylor it's one of the best like shooting teams in the Big 12 as well, or at least scoring wise. But Texas has had a lot of close games this year. They're not really looking like themselves, I want to say. They're kind of in like the mid to honestly lower tier in terms of Big 12 teams. They've had their opportunities to get big wins, but they just really haven't executed. And, what stands out to me is, I say it's been a lot of close games. They have an average margin of negative 2.3 in the Big 12. So, they're not losing by a ton, but even when they win, it's not enough to bring the margin down.
Yeah, I mean, really, they've had like not a lot of big wins. I mean, I'm kind of looking at it here. That Oklahoma game, if you take that one out, their best win is by a singular point over, or I guess, yeah, probably a singular point on the road against Cincinnati. Because, I mean, this team hasn't really done that well at home. Their one win at home is a 2-point win over Baylor, and we know kind of how Baylor was doing at the time. But, I mean, if that Texas team, I mean, they've just been playing better on the road, to be honest. I mean, that Oklahoma game stands out to me that it's like almost a fluke game where they're taking down at the time, probably a top 20 team, by 15 points.
Right.
Whereas the next game, still on the road, they lose by 12 points. So it's like, really, I don't really know what to expect from this team.
And that you're kind of hitting on what I wanted to talk about, which is the losses stand out a lot more than their wins do. And, with a loss, it's on the road, but to West Virginia, I mean, I know it's on the road, but that's one of the worst teams in this conference. And I know, again, a close game. They only lose by 3, I want to say. 3. And then, their road losses as well. I mean, BYU, and then at home with a chance. And Houston's a great team as well, and they kept that game close as well. But they're kind of like Iowa State, where they just don't really execute in the moment, late in games. But, you also talk about getting blown out by, a team like Texas Tech, who, they're a really good team. But it's just the moments and the games that they have had, they have just not executed on, their opportunities.
Yeah, and they lost at home to UCF, which is, although UCF did beat Kansas too, so, I mean, they are kind of one of those teams that's just going to get random wins whenever. They still lost at home to UCF. So it's like, it's almost not even as worrying playing them on the road, or on the road.
Yeah.
Because going to Texas, it kind of seems like teams can win there. I mean, although the recent game, they went into overtime against Houston, which, again, that's honestly a good loss for them, but they still, as you said, didn't perform at the end, and they still ended up dropping that game, even though it did seem winnable for probably a good portion there.
And they got it's sad because they really do have some great guys on the team. The guy that you pointed out is Dylan Disu. I hope I'm saying that right. But I mean, he's he can hit from pretty much anywhere, and he's definitely been one of their best players, but still just no one really sticks out besides him. And I guess like Max, you want to say that one? You want to take that one? Abmas?
Something like that.
Hopefully.
They're like two guys that are in like pretty much top 6, so pretty much top 5 scorers in conference play currently. It's almost a similar story to Kansas, who has like 2 of the top 3 scorers. And although Iowa State, I mean, you would assume that the key to stopping Texas is shutting down these high scoring players. They didn't do that against Kansas, and they still won. So it's like, you kind of just have to, at some point, these really good players, I mean, we saw it against Texas A&M, these really good players, you can keep them down for a while, but at some point they're going to start scoring. And you kind of just have to like game plan around that. I mean, teams have done that. Obviously, these guys are scoring a lot of points, but Texas is still losing. So it's like, it's really, it's good for them to be scoring a lot, but at some points, that needs to, relate to wins.
Yeah, what you're alluding to there is that their defense it's just not great, and they're they're kind of, we were watching some games before we hopped on, but they're kind of like lazy on defense sometimes. They give up a lot of transition points. The turnovers are just not great as well. So I think it's just a team that hasn't really. I want to say there was like a decent amount of turnover. I mean, they lost Marcus Carr, who is one of their best players. And just having to regroup and rework around the players that you have now, they just haven't really adjusted well to that. And then the Big 12, teams are going to hop on that. And if you have an off night in the Big 12, I mean, which Texas really seems like they have had, and it is kind of scary because I feel like they can put something together later on. Yeah. But as of right now, I just haven't really seen anything to fear them, or to have Iowa State fear them as much as they have had to a couple years ago, or these past couple years.
And you talk about these like players that maybe like the turnover, but there's also players that kind of aren't really living up to expectations. I mean, obviously we kind of have to bring up Tyrese Hunter, who went there assuming that he would be in a better role, but has come nowhere near to his level of production that he had at Iowa State. I mean, he like has okay games, but he's now in his second year with Texas and hasn't looked great.
Yeah, and I just kind of another thing we were talking about with Tyrese is that how he declares for the NBA draft while still keeping his eligibility. I feel like that's just him knowing he's not. he's not going to get drafted. But, Tyrese, if you're listening to this, sorry. But, yeah, no, I mean, he's not really – I mean, he's had some kind of standout games, a couple 20-point games. But other than that, he's scoring, maybe like 10, 7 points a game. That's why, he's brought down to 11 points per game. And, as what they thought he was going to be the star point guard coming over to Texas. And, okay, you think, oh, he's in the second year. Just like you said, still really has not been, performing up to expectations.
Mm-hmm. And there's almost – some disappointment, I assume, from fans that they don't get a welcome back Tyrese Hunter like they did last year.
Yeah.
Because obviously with conference realignment, you can't fit every team into your schedule. Mm-hmm. And you'll lose games like going to Allen Fieldhouse for Kansas. We lose Texas coming to Iowa State in their last year in the conference.
Right.
So, I guess we've already played out the Tyrese Hunter comes back home thing, and that we saw how that went, but it's, now Iowa State just has to play on the road against Texas.
And in terms of how they match up, I feel like they match up with Texas better than they do Baylor. I would feel more comfortable, I think maybe Iowa State loses this one against Baylor, and then they probably go on and beat Texas. If they beat both of them, I'd be really surprised because, again, these are both teams that both Baylor and Texas looking for that big win, and I think they know the opportunities that they have. And they have, like I mentioned, the ones that they haven't executed on, they have this chance against Iowa State. And, I think Iowa State's defense is really going to show in this matchup against Texas, just like it's going to against Baylor, where you're going up against another high scoring team and you just need to pretty much just make them play their worst offensive game.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, you talk about splitting these games, obviously. I am kind of feeling like the other way, where I think Iowa State has a good chance to take down Baylor. I mean, it's almost like the played out story of a team that's really hot is going to a team that's cold, and they're just going to kind of roll over them. Mm-hmm. And this Texas team is almost kind of scary to me in the way that they have picked up wins. It's almost random in a way, where it's like, yes, they could be the team that they could be like UCF and go in there and, stun them or whatever, but they could also be a team like Oklahoma that's expected to win by a lot and goes in or I guess even Houston goes in and barely pulls out a win or loses by 15. So it's like, it's really hard to expect what Texas team we see. And that's kind of the scary thing for me.
Yeah.
But I do feel like they're going to split these games on the road.
Yeah. It's just really hard to think that Iowa State's going to remain this hot and go on the road and pick up, 2 wins against, like I said, teams that are hunting for it. And anything can really happen in the Big 12. And I'm really just excited for both these games. But, obviously focusing on Baylor because will be the one on Saturday.
I do want to maybe side with history too, just because, I mean, obviously we saw them dominate Baylor last year, but also lose the one on the road to Texas. So it's like, I don't know. We'll kind of see what happens.
And they dominated Texas when they came to Iowa State, but then they, again, looks completely different when they go down to Austin to play them. So,
yeah, this Iowa State road team is a different team than it is at Hilton.
Yeah, and it stayed the same. I mean, that's just kind of how it's been for them the last couple of years. But, this is a time in the schedule where, they're the number 12 team in the nation, and they got to play like it. It doesn't matter if you're on the road or, and you're in the Big 12. You always say it's the toughest conference in the world, or in the nation, I should say, and you go out and prove it, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess all we have to do is look forward to them proving it. I mean, not much more we can say about it. So that's all we got for you guys today. Tune in next week when we recap Iowa State's Texas trip and go into some more basketball. So thanks for watching.